Hey everybody, Paul Abernathy here. On today's episode of Fast Trax Live, we're going to be looking at the required number of branch circuits based on the National Electrical Code. Now, we're not doing it based on a load calculation or service calculation. This is where people ask, what are the required branch circuits for a single family dwelling? Which ones are required? And of course, when it comes to the number of circuits necessary to supply the general lighting and general use receptacles, there is a little calculation that we can do there. So that's what we're going to talk about in today's lesson. And we're going to be using the Fast Trax program to do that. Okay. So let's go on and get in it. Hopefully you got your code books. I will say we are working on the 2023 edition of the National Electrical Code, but most of this information, other than some code references, which may change, is pretty much going to be the same whether you're in the 2020 or the 2023 or the 2017. They're all pretty much going to be the same. Okay, so let's look at what we're talking about right here. So we're in 6-1E. We're talking about the required branch circuits. There are certain branch circuits in a dwelling that are required. And so we're going to look through each one of these. And there are others that you could add, like an EV circuit, or if you have a garage, if you have a garage and you're going to have a branch circuit for that garage. So these are what's required minimally, or the required minimum branch circuits that required. You obviously could have more than this, okay? So one of the good things about our program, as you all that are familiar with our program know, is that we have these call-outs. And these call-outs, for example, A, B, and C here, are basically looking at this remote distribution panel here. Obviously, you know it is. It's got 4 conductors. It's got a separate equipment grounding conductor, and you notice that the neutral bus is isolated away from the frame or the case. And of course, you see the equipment ground is there. And of course, it's hard to tell, but you see a little green screw that's connecting the actual bus to the actual metal enclosure. Okay, this is a remote distribution panel. This is not a service panel. Okay. All right, so call outs being A, B, and C. Obviously, you can see they're all called out here. But what more importantly is that in our program, we have also these chevrons. And these chevrons are when you want to stop and you want to go to the NEC. So we're going to do that as well to kind of keep that practice up. So when you're studying the NEC and you're learning different things, that you know how to maneuver back and forth into the NEC. So here's the first requirement. The first thing that's required, and you've probably heard this before, it says a minimum of 2 20 amp small appliance branch circuit are required. Where does it say that in the code? Well, it's 210.11C1, and we'll go look at that. So it's a minimum of 2. Now, you could have more than 2. And of course, if you're going to do a load calculation, you have to take into consideration more than 2, right? But, and that would be 1500 VA each. But we talk about that in our load calculations chapter, which is unit 8 of our Fast Trax program. This is just trying to determine the minimum required branch circuits in a dwelling. You can have more than the minimum, but these are the minimums that are required. Okay, so the first is you got to have at least 2 20 amp small appliance branch circuits. Now, where do we see that? Well, let's go to the code. So here it is, 210.11C1. You saw us reference it right here. Now, let me start at the very beginning here. The required branch circuits, okay? So if you read into this, you'll have a number of branch circuits, and then of course you'll have the dwelling units, and then of course here you'll have the required branch circuits, okay? So these are the minimums. This is a minimum standard, so the minimum required. So if in our case, we were looking at 11C1, which is right here. So here's your small appliance branch circuits. So what does the code say? Oops, right there. It says, in addition to the number of branch circuit required by other parts of this section, and when it means by saying that, it means that, for example, laundry branch circuit is another part of this section. So you're going to have a required laundry circuit. Bathroom branch circuit, same concept. So those are the other parts of this section. Because what section are we talking about? We're talking about section 11 of 210. Okay, so that's what that language means. Now, if you're reading into it, it says, in addition to the number of branch circuits required by other parts of this section, 2 or more 20 ampere small appliance branch circuits shall be provided for all receptacle outlets specified by 210.52b. Okay, so that is your countertop receptacles. That is the receptacles that are going around the wall for the spacing that's in your kitchen, dining room, nook, pantry. All of those are required to be a part of this small appliance, of these minimum of 2 small appliance branch circuits. But could you have more than that? Absolutely. You can have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8, or whatever you want as far as the small appliance branch circuits. Just remember that in the load calculation, that is 1500 VA each for those small appliance branch circuits. So if you're going to have 5 of them, then it's going to be 1500 VA each in your calculation. If you're going to have 3 of them, then it's the same thing, 1500 times 3. If you're going to have 2 of them, 1500 times 2, and a minimum of 2. So that's going to be 3000 VA for the small appliance branch circuit. That's the load. Now we're not doing a load calc. Right now we're just looking at what are the required branch circuits in a dwelling. All right, so we know we have to have a minimum of 2, and this is why you folks that wire houses, you know that you do at least 2, and you have to serve the countertop by both of these branch circuits. Okay, so your countertop has to be at least served by the minimum of 2 small appliance branch circuits, but one of those branch circuits could leave and then go over and pick up the island, let's say. It could also go pick up the dining room receptacles or the nook receptacles or even the wall spacing receptacles that's in the kitchen, right? So again, a minimum of 2. The next thing that we have here is you have to have at least one 20 ampere laundry branch circuit is required. And what requires that? 210.11C2. So we're going to go look at that in the code. We're still here, and here's your C2 right here for laundry. And notice it says, in addition to the number of branch circuits required by other parts of this section, again, we discussed that. So above it, you've got the small appliance. That's the other parts of this section. And then below it, you got the bathroom. So these are in addition to those branch circuit requirements, okay? So it has to be at least one 20 amp branch circuit, right? And what is that laundry circuit? It can't supply any other outlets. Now, this is interesting. This right here, it is not talking about other laundry outlets, okay? Which doesn't necessarily have to be a receptacle because that's a device. It goes in an outlet box. But there are other potential outlets in this laundry room, like lighting outlets. Well, you're not going to pick up lighting outlets on this branch circuit, okay? This is only for the laundry receptacle outlets. That's all it's for. Okay, so you would have to bring a separate branch circuit to pick up your lighting. Now, that laundry lighting could be on with the hall lighting. Okay, be honest with you, it could even be on with the kitchen lighting because that's the lighting circuit. Okay, but these branch circuits right here, it specifically talks about receptacle outlets. Okay, and of course, as you see here, we have 210.52F. Right. And that right there, if I were to click on that, I don't know how well this will pop up on the screen. It doesn't pop up very well, but this is only talking about the receptacle that's required in the laundry area, all right? Okay, so that's the 2, at least 2. So you have to have at least 2 small appliances. You have to have at least 1 laundry circuit, okay? We're talking single family dwellings right now. And then lastly here for today, we're going to go in a few more. It is the bathroom branch circuit. All right, so let's go back really quickly to the graphic or the lesson. So look at the third one here. So you have to have a minimum of 120 volt, 20 ampere bathroom branch circuit is required by 210.11C3. Okay, and of course, that circuit for that bathroom is to serve the receptacles that are within 3 feet of the sink or basin. Okay, so that's what that's for. Okay, so if we were to look at that, let's go back to the NEC and just kind of give that a quick peek. Here's your bathroom requirement right here. Now, this is interesting. We'll look at the exception, but what does it say? It says, in addition to the number of branch circuits required by other parts of this section, and we discussed what that was, it's the laundry and the garage or which we haven't looked at yet, or the small appliance. So in addition to those, the bathroom circuit has to be installed. And it says one or more 120 volt, 20 ampere branch circuits shall be provided to supply bathroom receptacle outlets required by 210.52D, that's to serve the basin, and any countertop and similar work surface receptacle outlets. Such circuits shall have no other outlet. So again, there's an exception here for picking up things like lighting outlets, but in general, it's just there to do the receptacle outlets that are located in the room and that comply with meeting 210.52D, okay? Now, let's talk about this exception. So this exception, and I'll kind of illustrate what it's talking about. It says exception. It says where the 20 amp circuit supplies a single bathroom, okay? And it has a comma, so a single bathroom. Outlets for other equipment within the same bathroom shall be permitted to be supplied in accordance with 210.23B1 and B2. So, long and short of this is that if you're taking that branch circuit, that at least one 20 amp branch circuit, and I take it to a single bathroom, and I'm going to pick up the lighting and the receptacles in that bathroom, then it is okay to put other outlets like lighting outlets on that branch circuit. But the caveat to that is it cannot leave that bathroom. So it's very common today for installers to run a branch circuit for a bathroom to the branch circuit and then pick up the receptacles that are within 3 feet of the basin, okay? Top inside edge of the basin. But then they leave and go pick up another bathroom's receptacle. That's okay. You can daisy chain them like that as long as all it is supplying is the bathroom receptacles. You can't supply the lighting and the receptacles in a bathroom and then leave with that branch circuit and go to another bathroom. You can't do that if you're going to pick up the lighting too. That's the exception. If that branch circuit's going to stay in that bathroom and it's not going to leave and it's going to pick up all the lighting outlets in that bathroom, then that is okay for it to do so. Now, the reference that it's making to 210.23B1 and B2 is to make sure that you have loads where you're not going to exceed things for fixed appliances or fixed equipment that may be in that space. But other than that, just to keep it simple for you, you most certainly can supply and do the lighting outlets as well as the receptacle outlets in a single bathroom as long as that branch circuit does not go to another bathroom or pick up any outlet outside of that bathroom. Does that make sense? So that's what the exception is all about. Now, if we go to the NEC and we want to look at 210.23B1 and B2, I am more than happy to go take a quick peek because those are some limiting factors. And that is it right here. And that's for your 15 and 20 amp circuit. B1 is reminding you of not exceeding 80% on that branch circuit rating for utilization equipment that's cord and plug connected. And then, of course, utilization equipment that's fastened in place. And one of the ways that you got to be careful here is if you have a heat light fan combo. And the heat light fan combo, that utilization equipment that is fastened in place, is going to end up pulling more than 50% of the branch circuit's rating, then you have a problem. So that's all it's reminding you of. In the scheme of most normal installations, it's just an exhaust fan. It's not going to pull anything. It's some additional lighting outlets, things like that, some luminaires. You're okay. An exception is going to be where you'll be using that in 210.11C3. That's where you'd be using that exception. But it does remind you in this case that if you have these branch circuits and you have cord and plug connected, or you have utilization equipment that is also on that branch circuit, then you're going to have to be very careful about that branch circuit, okay? And that's all it's trying to convey with that reference, okay? All right, back to the lesson. As you can see, we have great call outs as well, just kind of pointing things out. This is pretty generic, but I think it's a great illustration to kind of make you aware of what a remote distribution panel is, or some people call a sub panel. Interesting note, this insulated equipment ground is not required to be insulated as shown here in a typical remote distribution panel. It just so happens it is in this illustration. But the funny thing is you wouldn't necessarily need this wire type equipment ground because it looks like the raceway itself is of the metallic type. And that could possibly qualify as an equipment grounding conductor as well under 250.118. Okay, so many things that we can pull from this illustration that you could talk about, have a discussion on, things like that. All right, so the next thing that I want to look at is whether you have 15 amp circuits in your dwelling or you have 20 amp circuits. Other than what's required, I need to do something else really quickly. There is another branch circuit that's required that we need to look at. And it wasn't in our illustration, I don't believe. Yeah, it wasn't called out, but I want to make you aware of it. Okay, so make sure that we cover all our bases here. So we're going to go back over here. I'm going to go back to 210.11 really quickly. And I want to go down here, and you'll also see that there's a number 4. Okay, we didn't look at that one. So this is another required branch circuit. Now, it is only required if you actually have a garage. Okay, that should be a no-brainer. So if you do have a garage, then it's going to be required. Now, let's read the code so we can understand it so people aren't confused. It says, in addition to the number of branch circuits required by other parts of this section, which by now you should know that the other parts are the small appliance branch circuits, the laundry, and the bathroom. Those are the other parts of this section because this is section 11. All right. It says at least 120 volt, 20 ampere branch circuit shall be installed to supply receptacle outlets, including those required by 210.52G1 for attached garages. Okay, so if it's attached to the dwelling, most certainly have to have this minimum branch circuit, minimum of 1. But it says, and in detached garages with electric power. All right, so what's important and what's significant about that? If you have an attached structure that does not have power to it, then you're not required to have the branch circuit to it. Pretty simple, right? But if there is an intention to run power there, then you're required to have that branch circuit. If the garage is attached to the dwelling, then you are required to have at least one garage branch circuit. Makes sense, right? Why? Because in that garage, you're required to have receptacle outlets installed depending on the number of vehicle bays. So in order to supply those, as well in the 2023 code, any other receptacle outlet that's inside that garage could be powered by this circuit. Then you have to make sure that you install that branch circuit. So that's a minimum branch circuit requirement, at least one. Can you have more than one? Absolutely. It says at least one. So if you have at least one, you've met the code. But nothing says you can't have more than one. Now, one thing to remember with all of this is, again, if you don't have a garage, obviously this is not required. So it's not a required branch circuit unless you do have a garage that's attached. And it's only a required branch circuit for a detached garage if, of course, you actually run power to it. That should be a no-brainer. Okay, so anyway, so there you go. And it also, again, makes a point to say that the circuit shall have, and I'll highlight it real quick for you. This circuit, the one that we're running to this garage, shall have no other outlets. Now, again, let's not have people get confused about the term outlet, right? Outlet does not mean receptacle. Outlet is a point on the system where power is taken to supply utilization equipment. It just so happens that a receptacle is a device and it gets installed in an outlet box. When that comes together, that's called a receptacle outlet. Okay, so it's a device, but it's installed in an outlet box, and that's the point where you're taking power from the system. Okay, so when it says it like that, when it says the circuit shall have no other outlets, what it's really saying is, you know what? You're not going to have lighting outlets on it. We don't want lighting outlets on it. We only want it for use with receptacle outlets and receptacle applications. Now, it also goes on to say additional, and that's what you see in the yellow, which is a change for the 2023 for clarity. It says additional branch circuits rated 15 amperes or greater shall be permitted to serve receptacle outlets other than those required by 210.52G1. the 210.52G1, that's the ones that require a receptacle for each vehicle bay. So if you have a 3-car garage, 3 vehicle bays, you have to have a receptacle in the footprint of each vehicle bay. So 1, 2, 3. Okay. So it says, you know what? I'll let you have additional circuits in there, and they don't have to be 20 ampere. That was another misconception a couple cycles ago that like, oh, if I want to have additional branch circuits in the garage, they all had to be at least 20 amp. That's not true. And it's been made very clear under the 2023 edition of the National Electrical Code that you can have additional ones if you want. That's perfectly fine. Now, you see there's 2 exceptions here. The exceptions, and the second one is going to be very much like the exception that we talked about for bathrooms. Very similar. In fact, it was probably cut and paste for this allowance. And now I'm going to show you why this makes sense. So look at the first exception. First exception says this circuit shall be permitted to supply outdoor receptacle outlets. So at the end of the day, it's not to supply any other outlet outside of the garage. But this exception says, you know what? If you've got a receptacle that's outside, and why should I have to run another whole circuit just to supply that convenience receptacle, that one that's required outside, whether it's the front or back of the dwelling, or maybe it's the one that's required to be within 25 feet of the HVAC equipment, right? Per the code. So maybe you're sitting there going, all right, it's just one lonely little receptacle. Well, this would allow you to go and supply that receptacle and have it be on that garage branch circuit, and that's okay. So you could use the exception to do that. And again, it only other outlet right now that'll permit is a receptacle outlet on the outside, okay? So it's located outside of the garage, all right? Now, exception number 2. Very similar to the bathroom exception. So let's say I'm the electrician. It's an attached garage. I got to run a minimum of 1 branch circuit for this garage to supply these receptacles. Now, what about being able to put the lighting on with that? Okay, well, normally you cannot because the general rule says no other outlets. So that would say no, you can't. But read this exception. Here's what it says. It says, where the 20 amp circuit supplies a single vehicle bay garage. It's just 1-car garage. Very convenient for some of these efficiencies and things like that that are very small that have their own just a 1-car garage. If that's what you have, then basically it's like having a bathroom in a sense, for simplicity's sake. So that branch circuit is supplying the receptacle that is in that garage, especially the one that's required by 210.52G1 for that 1 vehicle bay, right? Well, here's what it says. It says, okay, well, if it's a single vehicle bay garage, outlets for equipment within the same garage shall be permitted to supply in accordance with 210.23B1 and B2. So what does that mean? Well, it's the same thing kind of for the bathroom. If it's a 1-car garage and I'm supplying that receptacle, then it's going to allow me to also pick up the lighting in there. That's another example of an outlet that I could pick up. And so there's nothing wrong with doing the lighting as well as the receptacle for the vehicle bay, maybe even pick up the garage door opener, all in the same location. That would be perfectly okay, as long as, again, that circuit is only to supply what's in that single vehicle bay. That's it. So again, that's very similar to what you see with that bathroom application. And of course, you also had the 210.23B1 and B2 limitation for cord and plug connected, so you don't exceed 80% of the branch circuit, and fixed in place so that the circuit is not exceeding 50% of the branch circuit. Same rules, same thing applies. But this exception would allow you to take a single vehicle car bay, pick up the receptacles, and pick up the lighting all within 1 single vehicle bay. And that would be okay. So that's the exception for that requirement. Right? So I wanted to make sure I covered that because that is something that there was significant additions to that in the National Electrical Code. All right, let's go back to our lesson and see what else we can pick up here. Let's see here. Let me get rid of this. And let's see. Okay, let's go to the next one here. All right. So the next thing here is, okay, so we know what the minimum circuits are. Now we always understand that when we're doing the calculations and all, we need to know how many of a specific branch circuits do we need in the dwelling, right? So that's where the 3 VA per square foot comes in. So not only in the load calculation where we do 3 VA per square foot, and then we do the 1500 VA for each small appliance branch circuit, we do 1500 VA for the laundry, so we do all of that, right? Now, when it comes to the 3 VA per square foot, obviously in the load calculation, we're going to be able to apply some demand factors, right? The first, when we look at this first 3,000 at 100%, the next 117,000 at 35%, and everything over that at 25%. Y'all are familiar with that, right? Well, that has nothing to do with determining the number of actual branch circuits that we need. Now, I think most electricians don't give this any thought because you're going to put a lot of branch circuits in a dwelling anyway, right? But there is always a confusion when people go, well, and if you're in an exam, they might ask you, if this is a certain square footage dwelling, how many are the required 15 amp branch circuits or how many 20? Well, we just recently saw how many 20s are required, right? A 15 amp branch circuit is perfectly fine for general use receptacles. Now there's people out there that say, well, I wouldn't do that. I'm just going to always install 20 amp. Well, that's a design choice. The code doesn't care for general use and general application, general lighting and general receptacle use. Then I can use 15 amps if I want. If you want to use 20, that's fine as well. So what we're going to see is, let's kind of do a VA per square foot for a certain size dwelling, and we're going to try to determine what's the minimum number of 15 amp branch circuits we need, and what's the minimum number of 20 amp branch circuits we need. This could be on an exam, but at the end of the day, it really is a real thing because you have a load calc, and now you have a circuit calc. How many circuits do I need? So let's kind of look at it. All right, so we're here, and this in our Fast Tracks, for those that are following along that are in the Fast Tracks program, we're still in Unit 6, and this is 1F. And then here's A. Now here's the dwelling, and this dwelling is 1,400 square foot. All right, and so we're not doing a load calc. We're trying to determine what's the minimum number of 15 amp branch circuits. Now again, you still got a number of 20 amp branch circuits that are for specific purposes. The small appliance branch circuits, the laundry, the garage, that type of the bathroom, that's different. This is trying to determine, okay, well, how many 15 amp branch circuits could we need? And this is only for the general use and general lighting application. So let's look at it here. Okay, A. Okay, so the question is how to find the minimum number of 15 amp branch circuits that's required for this 1,400 square foot dwelling. All right, well, if you look at 220.41 of the NEC, and we'll go look at that, I'll highlight that. And remember, we're in the 2023 edition of the NEC, so it's going to be different if you're in the 2020 or possibly the 2017. Okay, so we're going to go look at the code really quickly and see what it says about the general lighting receptacle loads in accordance to 220.41. So let's kind of go there. And I'm going to go down to 220.41 and get us that information. Let's see here. Okay, 220.41. All right, so you might have remembered this from 220.14J in the 2020 edition. So there has been some changes for the 2023. So now all of this thing about 3 VA per square foot and all of that is now located in 220.41 for those that are looking at code changes. So here's what it says. It says dwelling unit, the minimum unit load. It says in one family, two family, and multifamily, the minimum unit load shall not be less than 3 VA, and we're working out of VAs here, and we're not going to use volt amperes for that. We're using 3 VA per square foot is what we typically will see, okay? So we're not looking at meters squared, we're looking at feet squared. And it goes on to say, unit loads including the following lighting and receptacle outlets, and no additional load calculations shall be required. Okay? So, 3 VA per square foot, what is it covering in this dwelling at 1,400 square foot? Well, number one, you see on the screen, people ask these questions all the time. What does that 3 VA cover? Well, here's the first thing it covers. So, All general use receptacle outlets of 20 ampere ratings or less, including receptacles connected to the circuit specified in 210.11C3 and C4. Y'all remember what that was? So that 3 VA per square foot, when you're doing a load calculation, you don't use 1500 VA for the bathroom, and you don't use 1500 VA for the garage branch circuit. That is absorbed in the 3 VA per square foot. But remember, the small appliance and the laundry each are 1500 VA per 20 amp branch circuit. But what's interesting here is that 3 VA per square foot in your load count, guess what? It already takes in the factors that have to do with the garage and the bathroom. It's already figured in to everything. So that's already done for you. Next, it says the receptacle outlet specified in 210.52E and G. That is the receptacles that are in the front or the back of a dwelling, those outside receptacles, or those that are in the basement. All of that is based on your square footage, so that is part of the 3 VA per square foot. Don't have to do any additional calculation for that. And then the third one is basically telling you all of your lighting that's required by 210.70, the lighting in your kitchen, the lighting in your bedrooms, the lighting in your dining room, all of that is already factored into the 3 VA per square feet. It's already in there, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So that 3 VA per square foot covers an awful lot. Now let me tell you folks, if you hear me talking about 3 VA per square foot and you're like, I'm lost, I don't know what 3 VA per square foot is, I don't know what this is, then this is a little bit more advanced than you are right now. I encourage you to get our Fast Trax program. We will walk you through every piece of it. And that's the difference in a truly structured program. It's designed to walk you through it and help you learn the National Electrical Code. I'm talking advanced topics right here, understanding how to calculate the minimum number of circuits and talking about VA per square foot. I'm giving you a lot of information. If any of this is confusing for you, make sure you get in our Fast Trax program. I want you to learn, but I want you to learn the right way, okay? All right, so back over here to what we've got. Okay, so remember it is 1,400 square feet, right? That's our dwelling. And remember, it's 3 VA per square foot. That's what it says in 220.41 of the 2023 NEC. So it's just that simple. We take 1,400 times 3, and that is 4,200 volt amperes. Okay? Now, you're not going to do anything like you do with the load calculation. Okay? You're not going to apply demands to this. You're not going to do the first 3,000 at this. No, we're trying to determine the number of branch circuits. We're not doing a load calculation, okay? So that's where you have to we're using the same numbers, the same 3 VA per square foot is what we use in a load calc, but we're also using it now to determine the minimum number of 15 amp branch circuits. And they are in addition to the required 20 amp branch circuits that we just looked at a minute ago. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, so we now divide the total VA by 120 because these are 120 volt circuits to find the total amperes. So 4,200 divided by 120 is 35 amperes. Okay, so that's what we've got, 35 amps. Now, to determine the number of 15 amp branch circuits to be able to supply that 35 amps, you could probably do this in your head, but we need to look at it. So what do? You divide that 35 by 15, because that's the rating of the circuit breaker that we're working with. And now we'll find that that comes out to 35 divided by 15 is 2.33. Well, you know what? We're talking about the minimum number of branch circuits at 15 amperes. You can't have a 0.3 of a circuit. So if it requires 2.3, then I'm going to have to round it to what? To 3. So I need a minimum of 3 15 amp branch circuits to supply that 4,200 VA worth of load based on 3 VA per square foot, okay? So that's the minimum. Now, in reality, you're probably going to have way more than that. You're probably going to have a circuit to one bedroom, a circuit to another bedroom, circuit to the living room. But when it comes to the code, that is how you calculate it out. So Now, what if we did this same thing and you said to me, and again, this is for your general lighting and general use receptacles. It's nothing to do with the small appliance. It's nothing to do with the laundry, anything like that, or any specialty circuits for other loads like microwaves or whatever. Totally different. We're just looking at the required branch circuits. Now, what if I made a choice and I want to use 12 gauge? I want to use 20 amp circuits for all this general lighting and general use receptacle. Okay, it's exactly the same. Still 1,400 square feet, still 3 VA per square foot. It's still 4,200 VA. The only difference here is you still do 4,200 divided by 120, that's 35. But instead of dividing 35 by 15, you guessed it, you're going to divide it by 20. And in that case, it's going to be 35 divided by 20 is going to be 1.75. Well, remember what I said earlier? You can't have a 0.75 of a circuit. So you're going to round it up. So the minimum required branch circuits here is 2. So if you want to do all your general use and general receptacles in this small dwelling, if you want to do them with a 15 amp overcurrent device or a 15 amp rated circuit, then you're going to need 3 to cover all of the receptacles and the lighting and everything. If you want to use 20 amp devices to do this, and you're going to use 12 gauge, then you need a minimum of what? At least 2. Now, this is really just an exercise for exam prep, to be honest with you. Because in the real world, you're probably going to do much more than that, okay? You're probably going to install 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10 branch circuits. But our effort here was to show you what's required as far as the minimums are required, okay? That's what we're doing with this. Now, if you don't install an EV, electric vehicle charger, then you're not required to put the branch circuit in. Right? If you don't have a garage, then you don't need a garage branch circuit. If you have a detached garage, but there's no intention to run power, then I don't need the garage branch circuit. But for single family dwellings, in our example today, I need at least 2 small appliance branch circuits, 20 amps. I need at least 1 laundry circuit at 20 amp. Those are required circuits. Okay? If a bathroom requires a branch circuit to the bathroom, okay, to serve those receptacles that are required for that bathroom within 3 feet of the basin. You do have an exception to pick up other outlets, like lighting outlets, in that bathroom if you meet that exception. Those are required circuits. Now, when it comes to the required number of general use and general lighting circuits, you saw how that if you're going to use 15 amps for that, then we needed a minimum of 3 for that size dwelling. If we're using a 20 amp branch circuit, we're using 12 gauge, then we have a minimum of 2. Okay, so be careful because that may be what an exam asks you. What's the minimum required number of branch circuits? Well, they don't have to tell you to take the consideration the general use. They don't have to tell you to do the small appliance and the laundry or the bathroom. You should already know this. So again, 2 for the small appliance, 1 for the bathroom, 1 for the laundry. Those are all the 20s. And then depending on how they ask the question, I would need, for this size dwelling, I need at least 3 15 amp branch circuits or at least 2 20 amp branch circuits. Those are the required branch circuits for that dwelling. Now, again, that's not to say you're not going to have other additional branch circuits inside of this dwelling, but that's not what we were talking about. We're talking about what is required as the minimum number of branch circuits. All right? All right, folks, hopefully you got something out of that today. And if you have any questions, feel free to let us know. Go to this website right here. If you want to get a good course on the National Electrical Code, I'm more than happy to have you in our program. We'll teach you every facet of the National Electrical Code. You get all these great illustrations. If you purchase our enhanced program, you'll get a lot of videos, much like this one, to help you learn the NEC. And you also get to join us 2 times a month on Wednesday nights, where you can ask me any question you want about the National Electrical Code. Till next time, folks, stay safe, God bless, and always do your best.